Back in 2019, a Robbert Eggers film The Lighthouse was released. It was a crazy story about two lighthouse keepers descending into madness on a lonely lighthouse. It had even Lovecraftian feel to it. But did you know that that film was based on the true events? Well, at least kind of. Welcome back to J-Talk, fellow talkers, and on this episode we're gonna talk about the real lighthouse incident that took place on the Wales coast on 1801. It's a tale of gloom and terror, so buckle up. Of course, before we jump into the episode, please leave us a like by hitting the thumbs up, hit the notification bell if you are a subscriber, and if you're not, why wait? Hit the subscription button immediately. Let's talk about the lighthouse. One of the most haunting incidents in a Wales maritime history has taken place on a tiny cluster of rocks off the Pembrokeshire coast known as the Smalls. Upon these rocks stood the small lighthouse made of 9 oak pillars and erected in 1776. A quarter of a century later, an incident occurred that inspired the Hollywood film The Lighthouse. This is a tale that has been talked about for centuries, a tale of one man who did not survive the elements and another who barely did. Let's go back to the 1801 when two men, Thomas Griffith and Thomas Howell, were stationed at the Smalls Lighthouse. These men did not get on, legends tell, and they had been thrust together 20 miles from anywhere. When Griffith became unwell after a freak accident, Howell tried to get help, but help did not arrive. The pair's remote location, the pattering storms, and the analog means of communication at the turn of the 19th century meant that Howell was his only hope. After weeks of suffering, Griffith died at Smalls Lighthouse. Panicked, Howell was unsure of his next move. He was certain that he would be accused of murdering his colleague, who was in reality known to be his foe. It would not look good that he would be the only man to be seen when the next shift would arrive. He considered throwing the body of Griffith into the ocean below, but concluded that it would incriminate him and paint a picture of a crime he did not commit. Instead, he kept the body inside the lighthouse. At least, that is, until the stench of decaying man began to drown his senses. He decided to build a coffin and place Griffith inside. He tied it to an exterior shelf. The storms continued to batter the Smalls. They continued also batter and attack the mind of Howell. Nobody quite knows for sure how long Howell was alone with the corpse of his colleague, but it was thought to have been around 3 weeks. However many days it was a long enough trauma to crawl in. Trauma caused by the isolation that came with nothing but waves for company and by haunting presence of a dead body just feet away. After all, the lighthouse wasn't a large building. The hut was less than 5 meters in diameter, so any attempts to escape reality would have been utterly pointless. Dr. C.N. Rees, the co-editor of Wales and the Sea, 10,000 Years of Wales Maritime History, explained on the Wales Online. There has been quite a lot of discussion over the years about how the two men got on. I don't know for certain the nature of their relationship, but what is clear is that they must have been extraordinary people to be able to withstand those conditions. Howell had been a joiner previously, and he had made the coffin in which he put Griffith. That in itself must have taken few days. Once he had finished it, he placed Griffith inside and put the coffin on a shelf outside. But the extreme weather conditions blew the coffin apart. There was not a lot of room in there, so Howell would have not been spared the sight of this, but the light still burned and there had been a lot of descriptions of ships going past and seeing the light still on, not realizing what had happened. This is a tragic tale. Sadly, the tragedy did not end with Griffith's death. One night, the wind that blew apart coffin led recently departed man's arm to catch in the wind in such a manner that that it was visible to Howell inside the hut. One can only imagine his mental state. The only thing more frightening than being completely alone with the corpse would be to have your former colleagues beckon you from beyond the grave. There are even creepy tales of ship crews sailing past the lighthouse during the day and seeing this arm draped from torn casket. Unable to make out what it was, they went about their journey and appreciated the glow that the lighthouse continued to provide. After weeks of storms and nightmares, the weather improved and the boat from Milford was able to reach the Smalls. Once there, they found Griffith, a dead man, and Howell, a broken man. The boat took Howell back to Pembrokeshire shore, but he was not the same person that had left the coast just weeks earlier. He was a grey and disheveled. He was not there anymore, if you know what I mean. When you were at the Smalls, you were completely isolated, especially so during the storms. There was no help to be had. When Howell eventually returned to the mainland, he was so severely affected by what had happened out there that people, even those close to him, did not recognize him anymore. In this case, the incident at the Smalls changed history and it became a significant moment in the annals of British maritime. As well as the story behind the design of the Smalls Lighthouse itself was extraordinary, said Dr. Reeds. It was extremely important. Not only was it an early piece of lighthouse engineering and design, but it was vital for Wales. There were 11 or 12 lighthouses in Wales at the time, but none were so isolated than the Smalls. The tragedy and what happened has always been very interesting, but it was a symptomatic of the early days of lighthouses. It was very dangerous to just have two people out there. When you think about how many lives and ships were saved by people who manned the lighthouses in those times, those were heroic men. But it was also an important incident in history because there were never allowed to be two people on their own working in a lighthouse after that. There had to be at least three. It's a tale that attracts the imagination. As mentioned earlier, the small lighthouse incident has affected popular culture by inspiring at least two films named Lighthouse. The whole thing is something of a true horror story. The fact that the regulations were changed in 1801 shows that the Small has played a very important role in maritime history. The old Smalls Lighthouse was replaced in 1861 by the 41-meter tall tower that stands today. Then, 126 years later, in 1987, it was finally automated, bringing an end to a system that had seen UK lighthouses manned for generations after generations. In 1801, when Thomas Howell and Thomas Griffith left Pembrokeshire and headed into the Irish Sea, they had no idea of the horror that would befall them in the coming days. For Griffith, it was to be his last voyage before his tragic death, and for Howell, the mission would cost him his youth and his sanity. Well, that was a quiet story indeed. Do you think there was a foul play involved? Let us know down in the comments. Also, before you go, hit the thumbs up for likes, hit the subscription button and the notification bell so you won't miss any of our coming episodes. As always, thanks for joining us and see you next time.